Zynga Incorporated is the world's leading provider of social game services with more than 240 million monthly active users playing its games, which include Cityville, Zynga Poker, Draw Something, Farmville, Castleville, Words with Friends, to name just a few. Zynga's games are available on a number of global platforms, including Facebook, Zynga.com, Google+, Tencent, Apple iOS, and Google Android. Through Zynga.org, Zynga players have raised more than $10 million for world social causes. Please welcome Zynga's CTO, Allan Leinwand.
Allan, thanks very much for joining us here on the show. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.
Great to have Zynga here. So, we were searching through your background, and we found a quote that you had put out there. And I wanted to ask you about that quote, and it has to do with something that you guys are calling zCloud. You wrote, you said, we own the base and rent the spike.
That's right.
So what does that mean, and how does it relate to zCloud, and what's zCloud all about?
Sure. Let me take you back a little bit and tell you how we build infrastructure at Zynga. And first of all, I'll start off by saying that Zynga is all about play. We want play to be a verb. We want part of daily people's lives. We want to be able to play. And we want people to think about search on Google and share on Facebook and shop on Amazon and play on Zynga.
Play games. We're talking about social games.
That's right.
So a couple of them, just for those of you who've been who've been hiding under a rock. Okay, the games are.
Farmville is one of our more popular games. Hopefully, I can stop everyone from playing Words with Friends, which is another one of our games that we have. Cityville, Castleville, Draw Something is one of the games that we've recently acquired that's part of our platform now.
Right.
And those are some of the social games that, as you mentioned, 240 million people play on a monthly basis.
Okay.
But what zCloud is. So when we have these games, people see these games as fun. They see them as playing new words on Words with Friends. They see them as unscrabbling things in Scrabble with friends. They see them playing people in chess, etc. What those really are is they're live services. And those live services really require infrastructure in order to run, to be available. We want our games to be social. We want them to be fun. And we want to be available from anyone on any device, whether it's a mobile phone, an iPad, or a browser. And all that availability and all that fun actually takes infrastructure on the back end. And Zynga as a company started building infrastructure in a fairly traditional way. We bought servers, we put them in cages, we started to rack and stack them. That was back in 2007 with games like Zynga Poker. And what we found is we had this inflection point actually in 2009 with Farmville. Farmville actually grew from 0 to 10 million daily active players in the first 5 weeks. Eventually grew to 25 million people playing Farmville in the first 5 months on a daily basis. And we realized that traditional IT ways of actually scaling infrastructure, buying servers, buying bandwidth, buying storage connectivity, wasn't going to scale at the rate we were scaling it. So we moved to the public cloud. And we moved to Amazon Web Services, and we continue to launch and scale games that way. And we continue to use the public cloud and to rent our services, if you will, over a period of time, including launching of games like Cafe World and Cityville, which was one of the fastest growing games at the time. But during that time period, we realized that we were renting that infrastructure instead of owning it. And we realized that if we could look at the way our games were growing, look at the way people were having fun on the infrastructure, we could actually plot the curve of that infrastructure growth. And if we could get ahead of that infrastructure curve just a little bit, then what we would end up being able to do is build that house, own it on our own. So we ended up building something we call zCloud. And zCloud is private infrastructure that's owned by Zynga that looks and operates like a public cloud, but it's our own private cloud. We also did something fairly unique. First of all, we built zCloud from proof of concept to actually launching a live game in 6 months. And we did that in the first part of 2011. Also, while doing that in 2011, we ended up coupling our private zCloud with the public cloud in a strategy that a lot of people thought was very innovative called the hybrid cloud. We had direct connections between Amazon and Zynga. We had ability to monitor and manage games and move workloads between the public and the private as we saw we needed to do that.
Which game was that, by the way?
We actually are able to do that on a variety of our games and services.
Which one did you launch in 6 months using that?
From the time that zCloud actually was a proof of concept to the time we actually launched it at the first live game, that was Cityville Hometown, which was in June of 2011. And we started on a smaller mobile game to sort of get our feet wet and understand how the private cloud would operate. And then we continued to scale. We actually also launched Castleville, which is now the fastest growing game to date. Castleville went from 0 to 5 million daily active players in 6 days. That was launched exclusively on zCloud. We did that, I think that was in November of 2011.
Okay, and then zCloud now is a platform that you're offering for others to use?
That's right. There's been an interesting evolution of what we've done. So if you think about what we did in 2011, we had 20% of our players playing on zCloud, private zCloud, and 80% of our players playing on Amazon. That hybrid cloud mix in January of 2011 was 20/80. But by the end of the year, we actually had it at 80/20. So we actually took a lot of those players and we took them off of the public cloud, brought them onto the private cloud, owned the base, if you will, and then continued to flex and scale as we saw fit. We've now reached that point where actually over 80% of, hopefully those of you in the room playing Zynga games, are playing on zCloud. Now, to your question about offering that up. It's an interesting way that Zynga actually consumes services. Zynga is a games company. And I spend a lot of time talking about infrastructure and talking about cloud computing and talking about how it's flexible and scalable and exciting. But Zynga, by definition, is about making games that people love to play. So it's my job to make sure that our game designers, our creators, our developers don't care about infrastructure. They don't have to care about servers. They shouldn't have to care about data centers and deployments and Amazon. What they should care about is making new features, new social fun that you can have in the game. So we really work exceptionally hard to extract out and build services on top of zCloud that our games themselves consume. Games consume services like statistics and analytics and payments and social feeds and connection to the social networks. And those are all services that layer on top of zCloud that our studios consume. What we've announced recently is something called the Zynga platform. What the Zynga platform is an expansion of those services, which will then be extended to third-party gaming developers. And those third-party gaming developers could then leverage those social services as well.
So the target audience is gaming developers.
That's
it's
right.
not just any old enterprise who wants
That's right.
to use you guys instead of Amazon.
Yeah, we don't have an intention of going after the generic cloud computing hosting market. What we want to do is we want to make games more social. We want to make games more fun. We want to offer a platform of services that will deliver making a game that might be a single-person game in a single environment. Well, now you want to make it social. You want to chat like you do in Words with Friends. You want to have leaderboards. You want to be able to publish to social network feeds. You want to be able to make your game a social game. Well, those are services that Zynga could offer to you via our publishing and our platform that rides on top of our zCloud infrastructure.
Built-in part of the platform. So, for example, Open Graph, Facebook's Open Graph, the developer doesn't have to worry about Open Graph itself. You kind of bake it in so that they can just focus on the features of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's a Facebook service, Open Graph
Yeah.
and Facebook service to get to the social network and the social graph. We would be offering services that would make games more social.
And speaking of feeding it into social feeds, you mentioned that earlier. You just mentioned that a minute ago. You transitioned Cityville at some point from working just with Facebook to working with Google+. So kind of curious, that's a big move. Google+ is obviously sort of an upstart in the social networking world, trying to take on Facebook and Twitter. How do you guys view Google+ against the entrenched Twitter and Facebook?
Well, from our point of view, it's all about getting access to players and making sure that players have a place to play. So whether they're playing on Social Network 1 or Social Network 2, from our perspective, we want to make sure that our games are there, they're accessible, they're fun, and they're social.
But Google+ has to reach some critical mass for you to take notice and actually invest time in it. What provoked you to actually go for it?
Well, I think the main thing for us, again, is just access to players. As people continue to want to expand their social circles, as they continue to want to play on different social networks, we want Zynga games to be there.
Any lessons? I mean, you're an IT guy, and our audience is primarily an IT audience. So when you think about all of the things that you've gone through, especially building a hybrid cloud, building to own, renting the spike, what are the lessons for our audience members in terms of how they build their infrastructures to scale well?
Well, one of the things I think that's an interesting lesson is cloud computing came on the scene maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I think the IT industry has itself sort of recoiled a little bit. They kind of went, oh no, I'm being outsourced. Cloud computing is going to take over the traditional IT model. They're going to host my servers and host my network. But I hearken back to 10 or 15 years ago when content distribution networks became into being. When CDNs first came out, people thought, you know what, we're not going to need to host things inside of the IT data center anymore. It's all going to be served from the edge. Well, guess what? It didn't really turn out that way. How it turned out is CDNs ended up becoming shock absorbers, becoming burstable, becoming able to leverage infrastructure at the edge to work in unison with the origin servers. And I think people should embrace cloud computing that way. We think the hybrid cloud, the combination of public and private, owning that base, tuning that base, making that base actually custom built for your application, and using the public cloud as something that is there to expand into, to make sure that when you have these, as we call them in Zynga speak, moments of delight and player delight exist, that they're going to be there and that public cloud can do that. I think the lesson is really continue to be flexible, continue to use these tools as vehicles, and continue to think about how do you embrace these technologies and use them in a common IT environment.
Final topic.
Sure.
Big data. You're a company built around social.
Yeah.
You have to be consuming a lot of social data and trying to understand your customers. How is Zynga using big data?
Yeah, for Zynga, using big data, and we do a lot of big data because we have a lot of big games. And for us, big data is about understanding what the players are doing on the platform and tuning the platform and tuning our games to match the needs of those players. We collect data around demographics, we collect data around what players are doing within the games, we collect statistics around what features perhaps are more viral and what features perhaps people are using, whether they like the purple cows better than the blue cows, and we keep track of all that. You know, one of my favorite big data stats is during the holiday season last year, we actually outscored Santa Claus by 3 times. So we actually sent 36 billion gifts during the holiday season in 2011. And here's how we figured out we're bigger than Santa Claus. We said, okay, there's 2.2 billion kids on the planet. And if Santa Claus is generous and he gives 6 gifts to each kid, that's roughly 13 billion gifts globally. So we did about 3x that. Of course, you have to assume Santa Claus exists, and he, non-discriminate against all religions. So.
And
Kids watching.
Yeah. And that
Don't listen to him.
that doesn't include the number of kilojoules that his reindeer burned getting around the world and all that, right?
That's a big data number too.
That's a big data number too. Okay, well, Allan Leinwand, CTO for Zynga, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.